They're using a medical diagnosis that's already been ruled by the highest criminal court in Texas as unreliable to take away a child from a parent. When I first learned about this problem, I thought no doctor would ever initiate a removal unless they had reasonable cause. But I've been handling cases like this for a long time, and what I found, to our shame, is that the doctors have access to all of the science, and the courts have ruled on it. It's just being ignored. So now we're in a position where this child has been taken away from his parents. They've been targeted by an agency with endless financial resources, and if they can't mount a sufficient defense. His name is Luca. His parents, Candace and Nick, have been accused of shaken baby syndrome.
Shaken baby syndrome. Shaken baby syndrome.
What is shaken baby syndrome?
To be clear, they're literally being accused of shaking him so hard it made his brain bleed.
It started in late December when Luca had a sudden episode where he seemed to not really be breathing properly. It was very brief, but obviously concerning. His parents, Candace and Nick, very worried, called their pediatrician, who believed that it might be some type of breath-holding spell, which is something that can happen in newborns. But then, a few weeks later, it happened again, and so they rushed Luca to the hospital, and very quickly the doctors found out what was wrong. He had a brain bleed and retinal hemorrhaging. As a parent, when you hear news like that, your first question is always, is he going to be okay?
Was the baby in an accident? Does he have any underlying medical conditions? These are all questions you have to investigate when you see something like that.
Instead, the question very quickly turned from what happened to this child to instead be who did this to this child. The next day, the hospital called CPS on the parents.
Child abuse? Really? Was there any skull fractures? No. Any broken bones? No. Any bruises? No. Were there any signs of trauma at all? No, no, no. Okay, then what's the theory? What creative form of child abuse leaves absolutely no mark on the child?
CPS removed Luca from his family and placed him into foster care. From that moment, every decision about Luca's medical care, every decision about his daily life, it was no longer his parents to make.
The parents went into the hospital with a medical question, and what started as a question became an allegation. And the allegation became a removal. And as of today, he's still gone.
Unfortunately, Luca isn't an isolated incident. Many, many families have been ripped apart because doctors rushed to accuse them of shaken baby syndrome. However, for decades now, the science to support shaken baby syndrome as being some type of indisputable proof of abuse has been falling apart. Doctors keep discovering that there are all sorts of other medical explanations that have nothing to do with abuse. They just weren't looking for them.
Candace and Nick had informed the doctors that both sides of their family had a history of blood disorders. The doctors didn't seem to really care about that.
It turns out that Luca's medical records showed that since birth, the size of his head had been growing much faster than the rest of his body, which was an indication that he had been suffering from a recurring brain bleed since birth that was causing his head to swell. But doctors didn't notice that until he started having other symptoms.
Alternative medical explanations for these cases are numerous, but the problem is that the moment someone uses the term child abuse, it's like everyone turns off their brain and they stop looking for other explanations. Then the parents have to do the work to bring in the experts. CPS and the doctors should have consulted on their own at the very beginning. Cases built on this diagnosis have been challenged, re-examined, and now finally they're getting reversed.
Recently in New Jersey, their Supreme Court ruled 6-1 that shaken baby syndrome cannot serve as the basis to convict someone of child abuse because it's too unreliable. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals also ruled that shaken baby syndrome was too unreliable to be used to convict somebody of child abuse in criminal court.
If all of that's true, how can CPS keep Luca?
It's a legal technicality.
Technicality?
Yeah. If the district attorney tried to get you convicted of child abuse in the criminal court, based on this theory, they'd probably get kicked out of the court because the Texas Criminal Court of Appeals has already settled this issue.
The problem is, CPS doesn't use the criminal process when they take your child. They use the civil process.
CPS can still walk into a civil court and get your child taken away based on the exact same allegation.
Next, the parents received a service plan, which is a list of things they have to complete in order to get their son back.
Those requirements were ridiculous. Drug testing with no allegation of drug use, psychological evaluations, other services that have already begun voluntarily were required again,
This is typical CPS stuff. They want a list of things the family has to complete so that they can feel like they're doing something that will fix these parents. And many times it feels to the parents like they're kind of taking the CPS equivalent of a driving safety course to get their kids back. But then they complete the course and they discover that CPS has moved the goalpost and they still don't have their kid back.
They're supposed to roll out other explanations. They didn't look for other explanations. They just created obstacles that drag out the case. But we're not going to let them do that.